Picture this. You've lived in the United States for over a year. You have a job, a lease, maybe kids in school. One morning, immigration agents show up. Within days, not months, not years, days, you are put on a plane and removed from the country. No judge, no hearing, no lawyer standing beside you arguing your case. It sounds like something out of an authoritarian nightmare, but as of this week, it is now legally happening across the entire United States, and almost nobody outside the legal world fully understands how we got here. So let's break this down, because this ruling is about to change the lives of potentially millions of people, and it says a lot about where the country is heading. To understand why this court decision is such a massive deal, you need to understand what expedited removal actually is. For decades, this tool existed in a very narrow lane. If someone was caught crossing the border illegally, right at or near the border, within about 2 weeks of entering, immigration officers could remove them almost immediately without putting them in front of an immigration judge. The idea was simple on paper. If you were caught basically the moment you crossed, there wasn't much to argue about, so the process could move fast. That was the boundary for years. Near the border, recent arrivals, a short window of time. But earlier this year, that boundary was blown wide open. The policy was expanded so that expedited removal could now apply to undocumented immigrants anywhere in the country, not just near the border, and to anyone who couldn't prove they had been continuously present in the U.S. for at least 2 years. Think about what that actually means. It means agents didn't need to catch someone in the act of crossing anymore. People were being pulled directly out of immigration courthouses, the very place where they had shown up voluntarily to handle their case the legal way, and processed for removal within days. Attorneys started calling it a bait and switch because people were doing exactly what the system told them to do, showing up, following the process, and getting swept up anyway. Naturally, this got challenged in court. A federal judge stepped in and blocked the nationwide expansion, ruling that rushing people out of the country without a meaningful opportunity to prove they qualified for an exemption created a serious risk of wrongful deportations. People who may have every legal right to be here removed before they could even make that case. For a while, that ruling held the line. It meant expedited removal stayed limited to its original, narrower use. That protection just got wiped out. A federal appeals court has now sided with the government, throwing out that lower court block and clearing the way for expedited removal to resume nationwide. And when you actually look at how the judges reasoned through this, it's genuinely worth pausing on. Nowhere in their decision did they say the government owes someone an explanation of how to actually win their case. They didn't say officers have to walk a person through their legal options or help them build a defense. Under their reading, being told what action is happening and roughly why, and then being given some kind of chance to push back, is enough to satisfy the Constitution. Nothing more. Not a real shot at succeeding. Not guidance. Just a bare minimum heads up, and then the clock starts ticking. Now, if you're thinking, okay, but surely there's a safety net here. Surely someone who's lived here for years and has real ties to the community isn't going to just get lumped in with someone who crossed illegally last week. That's exactly the part immigration attorneys are sounding the alarm about. The burden falls on the individual to prove they've been continuously present for 2 years or more, on the spot, often without a lawyer, often without even knowing that's the standard they need to meet. If you can't produce that proof fast enough, you can be gone before you ever get to make your case to an actual judge. Legal advocates are warning this creates exactly the kind of error-prone, unfair system where innocent people with legitimate claims to remain, get swept out the door simply because the system wasn't built to slow down and check. On the other side, the government's argument is just as important to understand, because this isn't a fringe position anymore. It's now backed by a federal appeals court. Officials have argued for months that this tool is essential to deal with what they describe as an unprecedented surge in illegal immigration, and that slowing the process down to accommodate every possible case review makes mass deportation effectively impossible at scale. From their perspective, this ruling isn't a loophole being exploited. It's the law finally being applied the way it was always written, and they see it as a long overdue correction to a limitation the government had placed on itself for years. So now you have two completely different pictures of the same ruling. One side sees a public safety and rule of law victory, finally allowing the government to enforce immigration law at the scale it was designed for. The other side sees a due process collapse, where the basic right to make your case before a judge has quietly been replaced by a system where you get days to prove you belong, and if you can't, you're already gone. And here's the part that should genuinely give you pause, regardless of where you land politically on immigration. This expansion isn't happening in isolation. It's landing at the exact same moment other major shifts are taking place. Hundreds of thousands of pending asylum cases are being rerouted straight into deportation courts, where judges can now dismiss them without even holding a hearing. Temporary protected status, the safety net that shielded certain vulnerable populations from being sent back into dangerous situations, is being stripped away for hundreds of thousands of people. When you stack all of these pieces together, what you're looking at isn't a single policy tweak. It's a fundamental restructuring of how due process works for immigrants in this country, happening in real time, largely outside the spotlight of mainstream daily news coverage. If you're new here, this is exactly the kind of story we dig into. The legal changes that sound technical and boring on the surface, but are actually reshaping people's lives right now, explained in a way that actually makes sense. So, if that's the kind of content you want more of, do me a favor and hit subscribe right now before you forget, because we're going to be tracking exactly how this ruling plays out in the weeks ahead. Now, let's talk about what actually happens next, because this ruling doesn't exist in a vacuum. It sets a precedent that could ripple out for years. Legal experts are already predicting a wave of emergency appeals, possibly all the way up to the Supreme Court, because the stakes here are enormous. We are talking about a legal standard that could apply to potentially millions of undocumented immigrants currently living in the U.S. who don't have airtight paperwork proving 2 continuous years of residency sitting in a folder ready to go. Think about how many people don't keep meticulous records like that. Utility bills, lease agreements, pay stubs going back 2 full years, all organized and ready to present within days of being detained. Even U.S. citizens would struggle to produce that kind of documentation on demand. That's the bar immigration attorneys say people are now being held to under intense time pressure, often while separated from family, without legal representation, and in some cases without even fully understanding what's being asked of them. There's also a bigger political dimension worth understanding, because this ruling isn't happening in a policy bubble. It's arriving alongside a broader deportation push that includes stepped-up arrests at airports, National Guard, and federal troop deployments into major cities, and increasingly aggressive tactics aimed at hitting daily arrest targets set by the administration. When you connect the dots, expedited removal isn't just a legal mechanism anymore. It's becoming one of the primary engines driving a much larger deportation machine, one designed specifically to move fast and avoid the kind of judicial bottlenecks that have slowed enforcement in the past. For communities across the country, especially in cities with large immigrant populations, this ruling is going to be felt almost immediately. Immigration lawyers are already advising clients differently, urging anyone without airtight proof of continuous residency to carry documentation with them at all times, to know their rights if approached by agents, and to have an emergency plan in place for their families. That is the level of urgency this ruling has created virtually overnight. So, where does this leave us? A federal appeals court has handed the government one of its biggest enforcement wins yet, dramatically expanding how fast someone can be removed from the country with the bare minimum of due process. Supporters call it the law finally being enforced as written. Critics call it one of the most significant rollbacks of immigration due process in modern history. And whichever side of this you land on, one thing is objectively true. The speed and scale of what's happening in immigration policy right now is unlike anything we've seen in years, and it is moving faster than most people are even aware of. This is exactly why staying informed on stories like this matters, because policy shifts like this don't stay in the headlines for long, but their effects last for years. If this breakdown helped you actually understand what's happening and why it matters, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next update, because this legal fight is far from over, and there's a very real chance this ends up in front of the Supreme Court before the year is out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.